Welcome to Chatting with Camille, helping you share the gospel of Jesus Christ at church, home, and beyond. Welcome! We are going to talk about ways that you can share the gospel of Jesus Christ at church. Specifically, we're going to go over teaching tips for the lesson that is typically taught on October 23rd, which is the gospel of Jesus Christ written in my heart. Now, this refers to the scripture in Jeremiah because that is what we were studying at home in Come Follow Me. Jeremiah 3 verse 33 states, "I will put my law in their inward parts and write it in their hearts, and will be their God, and they shall be my people." Often when we think about the gospel written in our hearts, it seems more of an abstract concept. But then as we ponder it a little bit, we realize that General Conference is one way that they're constantly telling us how to make the gospel a part of us so much that it is written in our hearts. Let's discuss some ideas. Idea number 1. The manual suggests going back to the talk, Let God Prevail by President Russell M. Nelson. This is an excellent talk and a great one to start off your lesson with. Here's a way that you can get it going. On the board, have 3 pieces of paper and divide up the word Israel on it. So IS on one, RA on another sheet, and EL on the last sheet. And then you're going to ask people what Israel stands for. It's been talked about a lot, so if they've been studying and following along, they'll probably know the answer, but it's okay if they don't. You can remind them. When you flip each part of Israel over, it will unveil what Israel means in one translation that President Nelson shares with us in his talk. And it means willing to let God prevail. Now, most of the time, they'll probably just say, let God prevail, but it's important to add that willing to let God prevail. President Nelson says that himself, that it is an important part of the translation. What does it mean to let God prevail? That means we're willing to put God first in our lives. Now, there are several questions in his talk that you can then read out loud, and people can either just ponder the answers themselves, or they can do a yes or no written down real fast. Some of the questions are like, are you willing to let God prevail? Are you willing to make him first? Things like that. There's a list of questions in there. And you just read each of those out, pause for a minute, let them think, and then write their answers, or at least mentally put their answer down. If any of those answers were a no, then ponder why. What is it that's holding us up? What are some steps that we can take to change that no into a yes, change that weakness into a strength? We're not perfect. It's okay. But what can we do to change that into then make it a yes and be a strength instead of a weakness there? And if all your answers were yes, that's excellent. But do your choices reflect that answer? And if not, where can you strengthen yourself? What is your weaknesses? Where can you fortify? And what can you do better in order to make that not only a yes, but back it up with your actions? Couple of great quotes that you can read. Your willingness to let God prevail in your life will allow your covenants with God to remain intact. You do not need to wander or wonder. Now, we're constantly talking about covenants these days because we're covenant Israel, right? The Children and Youth Program is all about becoming and being ready to take upon us additional covenants in the temple. Another quote is, when your greatest desire is to let God prevail, to be part of Israel, so many decisions become easier. So many issues become non-issues. This is a great quote to then lead to our next idea, which is talking about the new For the Strength of Youth manual. It was announced in the October 2022 General Conference, and I'm sure you've probably already talked about it a whole lot, or at least pondered it as you've read it yourself. This is a great opportunity to discuss it even more, because what that manual is an opportunity to get those principles, those doctrines of the gospel written in our hearts, so then those choices that we need to make are so much easier. Each section is broken into eternal truths. Those are the things we need written in our hearts, right? Then invitations, meaning ways that we can apply it in our lives. Promised blessings as a reminder of why we want to have those eternal truths and follow those invitations. And then lastly, there's always a temple recommend questions that go right along with those truths. Again, helping us remember about covenants and being prepared to make and keep those sacred covenants when we are ready to attend the temple. As you go through each section, or you could just pick one, or you can talk about it broadly, you can go over some of those 4 parts and talk about how we can then make sure that we are remembering these truths in our lives. We have a testimony of those truths and what we can do to make it even better. But in the back of the manual, it tells us to do your own spiritual checkup. Don't wait for interviews. You know, there's the 6-month interview and the yearly interview with the bishop, but don't wait for those. But do your spiritual checkup regularly. We need to choose to make the gospel written in our hearts every single day. Doing these spiritual checkups often is a great way to make sure we're doing that. It goes over the themes for young men's and young women's. It has the 10 commandments in there, and it also has the temple recommend questions. Going through those questions by yourself and being able to answer them in a way that shows we are letting God prevail in our lives is an excellent way to answer this question: is the gospel written in my heart? Talk about the Forge the Strength of Youth booklet all you want. You can spend your whole lesson if you want to, but obviously it can be a quick little thing as well. Idea number 3. In order to be able to write the gospel on our hearts, we have to put off the natural man, and we also have to be humble. Here's a fun object lesson that you can do for that. You can get Play-Doh or Stress Putty, or even Silly Putty is really great. And they each come in a container. That container is hard. We cannot really write on this with just a toothpick, right? We can't really etch into it. We have to shed the natural man. Take the dough out of the container and then show how this is a pliable substance. You can take a toothpick and you can etch in here the word gospel. If you have Silly Putty, you can even put it on like a Sunday comic page, press it in, and it'll copy it onto your Silly Putty. We are then able to really make those things from the Lord etched into our hearts. You can give everybody a little bit of Silly Putty or Play-Doh and they can write it on themselves. Remember, we want to use lots of different learning styles as we teach because we all learn in different ways. So being able to touch something and do something with our hands for a little bit is a great idea. Idea number 4, you're going to want a doll, like a little miniature doll. And if you don't have one, you could just get like a clothespin and draw a face on it. But something that can stand up on its own, as well as a stacking block game. Uno Stack was always one of my favorites, but Jenga is what we're going to use here today. You can put your doll up on the top. Name your doll whatever you want. You can name it together as a class if you want to. We're just going to call this one Princess Sunshine Unicorn. Okay? These blocks are going to represent the gospel of Jesus Christ and all the parts of it. You're going to invite people to come up one at a time and take a Jenga piece out. Now, you're not going to put it on top like you would in the game. We're just going to take the blocks out. And as we take a block out, you can have them say what this block represents in the gospel of Jesus Christ. Princess Sunshine Unicorn has decided that she's not going to obey the word of wisdom. She likes drinking a cup of coffee every day, and so we're going to take that out. And then this one, it's going to be, she's decided that she doesn't want to pay her tithing. She wants to use that money for something else, etc., until the Jenga tower falls. Because we cannot just pick and choose which part of the Gospels we're willing to follow. We have to write it all on our hearts, accept all of Jesus Christ on our hearts. The whole thing. It doesn't work where we just pick some of it, because eventually that's going to tumble over. When we say that we want God to prevail in our lives, we have to accept the whole thing. We want God to prevail in all parts of our lives. We cannot just pick and choose. Which leads us to idea number 5. A while ago in October 2018, Elder D. Todd Christofferson gave a talk where he encouraged us to eat our spiritual veggies. We need to eat our spiritual veggies daily and allow the gospel of Jesus Christ to penetrate our hearts and our souls every single day. What could be some spiritual veggies? You can bring some vegetables so that you have this object lesson displayed in front of you and people can pick up a carrot and say something that it represents. But this is a time for your class to put in their input and what things that they do to make sure that they are choosing to let God prevail in their lives every single day. If you want to use what Elder Christofferson said in his talk, I do have a printable sheet with vegetables on it that has the words written on what he talked about in his talk. You can print out those vegetables that I have made for you, draw a basket on the board, and tape up those vegetables as you talk about each one. You could pass out the vegetables to different individuals or different groups and ask them to talk about how we can have those things in our lives every day, what that looks like, what that means. For example, worthily taking the sacrament each week. Yes, that means that we've repented before, but what else might it mean? How do we prepare for the sacrament? We want to make these things more purposefully intentional, not just a happenstance, right? Love your neighbor. How do we do that? Yes, we can wave and smile and be nice and drop off a plate of cookies at Christmas, but how can we really love them? What does that look like? Talk about those things in groups, share them, have them present them up on the board, put them in a basket. What other vegetables people have come up with, they can make their own to add to the basket as well. Those are some ideas that can get you going on teaching this lesson. There are obviously a lot more general conference talks that you can tie into this lesson. The texts were not available when I recorded this podcast, so I don't have those for you beyond the For Strength of Youth manual. But President Nelson's, for example, about overcoming the world would be absolutely perfect for this lesson. I recommend you go back through it, read it, and see what quotes that you want to bring in for your class. Be sure to tune into Chatting with Camille next week as someone shares their faith-filled story of how they have chosen to let God prevail in their lives and learn from their story. Chat with you later. Come discover more gospel fun at cknscratch.com.